Five years on, the Nissan Juke is still standing out and still causing arguments. It is one of those polarizing cars that people either love or they hate. The bad news for the haters is that it's doing pretty well sales-wise, so it's not likely to go anywhere anytime soon. The good news for the fans is that it's just been improved. Updated at the beginning of the year, the Juke features styling upgrades and a new motor, and depending on which model you choose, Nissan's smartphone integration. The refreshed Juke is ready to take on the likes of newcomers like the Opel Mokka, which we got as a long-term test car. On the styling front, the Juke features new bumpers and wheels and a new grille. Not that any of that matters. Nissan calls the changes significant, although unless you're a die-hard Juke spotter, you're unlikely to notice much because the whole thing is still dominated by this otherworldly front end, which now includes Nissan's boomerang-shaped LED daytime running lights. The upgrades are not suddenly going to win the Juke a whole bunch of new fans because overall, it's still as far out of the mainstream as it ever was. Our Opel Mokka long-term test car is a good-looking thing that has the compact crossover dimensions down to a T, but parked next to the Juke, you wouldn't think the two compete for sales. I can't say I'm crazy about the look of the Juke, but I can appreciate it, purely because it's trying something different and managing to pull it off quite well. There's a fine line between different and gimmick, and the Juke has stayed on the right side of that line by having a design that, while not universally popular, is still cohesive. The SUV stance, the dynamic profile, the details, all of it combines to create something unique, and that's never a bad thing in a world of cars built around corporate styling and a desire to please most of the people most of the time. Don't get me wrong, there are some gimmicky things, but you only discover them once you start driving. Down there is a little screen that has a torque meter and a turbo boost gauge and a G-force meter, things that are probably more acceptable in a GTR. But in here, they really add nothing to the drive. And that's besides the fact that you shouldn't really be concentrating on a small screen located in the lower half of the center stack while trying to generate G-forces. And now that the entire Juke range is turbocharged, that particularly useless boost gauge will appear in whichever model you choose. Thankfully, you can tune that screen to the aircon channel by making use of some very clever work by Nissan's interior designers, something that could be used by a lot of other manufacturers. There are a number of reasons why we enjoy having the Opel Mokka as part of our long-term test fleet, but there is one thing that we're not particularly fond of, and that's the sheer amount of buttons required to operate the car's systems. But the Nissan Juke solves that with some trick technology. One set of buttons, two completely separate sets of functions. It helps keep the design clean and uncluttered. The materials and spec have been upgraded across the range, which all makes the Juke a decent value proposition, with things like Bluetooth, climate control and cruise control featured as standard in every model. Our Ascenta Plus spec test car also has keyless operation. It's a comfortable and cozy setup. The interior features prominent painted surfaces, as well as shapes and details that make sure the Juke's uniqueness isn't just on the outside. Boot space is generally not something to get excited about, and in the Juke's case, it's still not. But Nissan have managed to increase this car's boot volume by 40%, which is impressive. That uniqueness I was talking about is a bit of a theme in here. For a crossover, this car is a lot more sporty than you might expect, and not just because it's got a sport button down there. The new 1.2-litre petrol replaces the old 1.6-litre petrol. It's got 85 kilowatts and 190 newton meters, and initially, it does feel quite lively. Even though it puts out less power than a lot of its competition, it feels a lot more engaging than most. If you manage to ignore that characteristic and drive it in eco mode rather than sport mode, Nissan say you can get away with a fuel consumption figure of just 5.6 litres per 100 Ks. If you drive it in a way like it feels it wants to be driven, you will have a lot more fun because the feedback in here is actually quite good. It's got nice direct steering, a short gear shift, and quite a loud turbo wastegate. The downside to all of that, it can torque steer on occasion. It certainly can be less civilized than, say, our Opel Mokka, but then again, you could probably guess that just by looking at the two. The Mokka's 1400 turbo motor also manages to deliver a more impressive drive, not just in pure power terms, but because the Juke's turbo motor does lose a bit of shove once it's past the 4,500 RPM mark. The 6-speed manual needs to be worked properly to get the best out of the motor, but on the whole, it is easy to live with. Five years on, and with a facelift under its belt, the Nissan Juke is still an original. And not just because it's a car that invented its own class, but because it has its own take on styling and interior design. It may not have the perfect drive for a compact crossover, and its looks may still cause the odd argument, but it is still utterly unique. The 1.2-litre turbo motor delivers good low-down power and is generally easy to live with. You need to concentrate on the gear shift to get the best out of it though, and it does suffer from occasional torque steer. The Juke is an individual with looks and an interior that are like nothing else in its class. Far from being gimmicky though, it delivers a decent drive with good standard spec that also offers good value.